Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Maderos. I am the Community Engagement Manager at Post, and welcome to tonight's program, The Birds of Post Protected Lands. We have a great program for you. Before we begin, as usual, I want to remind everybody that we are on native lands. The lands in Post's working area have been home to Native people since time immemorial, and now including the groups, the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, Amamutsun tribal band, and Ramaytush Ohlone, as well as many descendants of the first people of this area. So we just want to pause and acknowledge that. Wherever you are, please pause to acknowledge the Native people whose land you are on. So for anybody who is new to Post, I wanted to share this quick clip for you, showing all the work that we've done since our founding in 1977. We've protected over 80,000 acres of land in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and northern Santa Cruz counties. And this, of course, is thanks to our generous supporters, people like you who support our work. And we just want to say thank you, from the bottom of our hearts. We are so lucky to be in this place where so many people care about protecting open space and natural lands for the benefit of all people. And we do this for a number of reasons, to provide public access and recreation opportunities for everybody, to protect our farmlands and our redwood forests. And a huge area of our work is protecting habitat for wildlife, all kinds of wildlife. Including plants, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, but also the birds. Birds are a huge aspect of our local ecosystems and something that many of you are passionate about. And we're going to be talking all about the birds of Post Protected Lands today with two wonderful people, Diane and Peter Hart. They are Post supporters and very active and avid birders. Diane is an educator who has written over 20 textbooks, and since her time, beginning with birding, she has become very active as a volunteer for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, former board president, I believe, of the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. And we also have Peter Hart, who is an AI and robotics pioneer and technology leader. He led the project that created the world's first robot with artificial intelligence, very cool, and many other such professional projects. But he is also serving on the board of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Noticing furniture maker and pianist, people of many talents. So today they're going to be talking all about their birding passion. And with that, I'm going to welcome them to the program. Hi, Diane and Peter. How are you two doing tonight?
Good. Hi, everybody.
Hey, I'm so happy that you're doing this with us. We're so privileged to be able to share so many of the photos that you've taken. And it's really incredible, all the work that you've done. I wanted to pause and just reflect on this little bit that you shared. You describe yourselves as late onset birders. I thought that was kind of cool. And can you just share a little bit about why you describe yourselves that way?
Well, that's because who we are. We've always been interested in the natural world. We've always been interested in being outdoors. But as we approach retirement, I said, we need to get out into nature more. Now we don't have to work so hard. And we tried 2 or 3 different things. And the thing that really grabbed us was bird watching, because you can do it anywhere. You can bird watch in the backyard, in the parking lot of Safeway, and anywhere in the world. And what we found is, as we've gotten into it, we see, we hear, we understand the natural world differently. And that's been like learning a new language in adulthood, and it keeps our brains really fresh.
That's wonderful. And it's really inspiring to me. You started after retirement, and now you're so heavily involved in these these major birding and bird organizations. And I just think about how I should have started many years ago learning my birds, and it's not too late. So I could imagine other people feel that way. So I thank you for sharing a little bit about that. So I know you have a lot to get into tonight with your presentation. So I'm gonna turn it over to you both. I want to say thank you again, and I'll let you know when your slides are ready there. If you could just share your slides, and you're looking good. So I'm gonna bring in your slides now and turn it over to you two. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark, for that generous introduction, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'll introduce this evening's topic. Diane will do the main presentation, and then I'll wrap it up with a few words at the end. Our story begins in the summer of 2020, when COVID-induced social isolation gave Diane the bright idea of starting a bird photography project for Post. Her concept was to create a photographic record of the bird life to be found on lands that Post has protected from development. Post-protected avifauna, to use the fancy word. In the almost 2 years since then, we photographed birds on 65 post-protected locations and built the website you see here, Birds of Protected Lands. Currently, the gallery holds 2,400 photos representing 210 species. For context, those 210 species amount to close to a quarter of North American bird species, all photographed on post-protected lands. To give you a sense of the geography, the map on the left shows post-protected lands in dark green, other protected lands in light green, and post projects by the orange pins. The map on the right shows the 65 locations where we photograph birds. In our area, we're fortunate to have a wide variety of habitats, and the post-protected sites encompass pretty much all of them. We have freshwater ponds and lakes. At the top, you may recognize Saucil Pond at the base of Windy Hill Open Space Preserve in Portola Valley. In the middle is Horseshoe Lake up on Skyline Ridge OSP, and the bottom is a much larger Clara Reservoir in southern St. Clara County. We have both fresh and saltwater marshes on the coast and along the bay. Moving inland, we have slopes covered with grasslands, oak savanna, and brushy chaparral plant communities in many places. Further upslope, we have dense woodlands with mixed broadleaf and conifer forests and threaded with riparian strips. Back out on the coast, we have beaches, coastal bluffs, and headlands like Año Nuevo State Park with its famous elephant seals. If you drive around on the coast side, you'll come across quite a few farms and ranches with signs like this one at Potrero Nuevo Farm on the lower stretch of Tunitas Creek Road. Potrero Nuevo is a special favorite among cyclists like me because for years, Christine and Bill have operated the Bike Hut, which generously provides refreshments to riders on an honor system basis. And with that, I'll turn it over to Diane, who will show you some of the birds that are found on these different habitats around the seasons of the year.
Thanks, Peter. So Saucil Pond at the bottom of Windy Hill is really a good place to start because Windy Hill was the first large conservation project undertaken by Post in 1981. Now, because it's only a couple of feet deep, Saucil Pond attracts dabbling ducks, such as this colorful male wood duck. Now, as the word dabbling suggests, these birds feed by sweeping their bills through the water or turning bottom up to feed just below the surface. Unlike most ducks, wood ducks nest in trees, sometimes a mile away from water. And so in order to reach their nest, their feet are tipped with sharp claws that enable them to actually climb up the trunk. In this sense, they are unique among birds, at least ducks. Mallards are the most common ducks we see in post-protected lands, and for good reason. These highly versatile ducks can live in nearly any wetland habitat, whether large or small, freshwater or salty, urban or rural, or natural or artificial, as long as the water is not too deep for a dabbling duck. Well, this adaptability has enabled them to span the globe, and it's estimated that there are over 10 million mallard ducks in North America alone. While dabblers such as wood ducks and mallards prefer shallow pools, diving ducks, like this ringneck, prefer deeper waters like Horseshoe Lake up on Skyline Ridge Open Space Preserve. Now, the ring around this duck's neck is practically invisible, while if you look carefully, you see the ring at the end of the bill is quite prominent. Why they named this bird after its least visible field mark has always puzzled us. The largest freshwater lake we visited was Clara Reservoir, and there we finally photographed our first member of the rail family, the elusive Sora. Now, in our search for rails, we've learned that they are far more often heard than seen. This Sora attracted our attention with a loud call that sounds like a horse whinnying. Soras are monogamous, means they mate for life. They're also prodigious breeders. A typical clutch ranges from 8 to 13 eggs, but sometimes can go up to 18 eggs. And in such cases, the eggs have to be double-decked or double-stacked in the nest. Both Western and Clark's grebes spend the winter at Clara Reservoir, and they're best seen at the end of the lake near the dam. Now, grebes spend virtually all of their lives in water, even building floating nests, so that they do not have to walk on land to breed. During mating season, the males engage in a ritual called rushing. They stand up and literally walk across the water in short stutter steps. Freshwater lakes and ponds often attract birds that feed on fish, including bald eagles. We found this eagle fishing at a small pond in the La Honda Creek Open Space Preserve. The talons or claws of an eagle's toes are razor sharp and curved for catching and holding their prey. These talons gave eagles the name raptor, which comes from the Latin word rapere, meaning to grip or to grasp. Now, once an eagle swoops down and grasps his prey, its talons stay locked on until the bird reaches land and can safely release its prize. On an Alaska cruise years ago, we saw a bald eagle that had caught a salmon too heavy for it to lift out of the water. For the next half hour, we watched as this bird used its wings to swim a mile back to shore. Only then could it release the fish. Now, had it not been able to swim to land, that eagle would have been pulled under the water by the salmon and drowned. More than a third of America's threatened and endangered species live only in wetlands. And our local wetlands are most active in winter, when they host wintering waterfowl who migrate south from their nesting grounds in the high Arctic. Among our winter migrants, our favorite winter migrants are the northern pintails that frequent Bear Island. They are the largest and, to our eyes, the most elegant of North America's dabbling ducks. The 3 islands that make up this refuge were once used for salt production. In the 1980s, Leslie Salt decided to develop the salt ponds into a large housing estate. When the company's plan was approved by Redwood City, a small but very determined group of local citizens protested by placing a referendum opposing the project on the ballot. It passed, but just by 44 votes. Post then spent the next decade raising money to purchase the islands and give them to the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge, and we're glad they did. The willets that winter at Bear Island look drab until they open their striped wings. Now, both genders of willets invest a lot in their offspring. The female sits on the nest by day, while the male takes a night shift. This division of labor works because willets can forage by day and by night. Now, while they can't see all that well in the dark, they use their sensitive beaks to feel in the sand for prey. Wetlands also attract insects and the birds that hunt them, including swallows. In this photo, an adult swallow is feeding a chick that seems almost as big as its parent. I recently read an article in the New Scientist that Earth is home to around 50 billion wild birds. The 2 top most populous species are house sparrows and European starlings, both of which are considered invasive species in the US. The next 2, to my surprise, are ring-billed gulls and barn swallows. Ravenswood Open Space Preserve is a smaller saltwater marsh in East Palo Alto. We've visited this marsh twice during king tides, hoping to see rare and always hidden ridgeway rails waiting out the flood on the boardwalks and islands. No such luck. But we did see this ring-billed gull, the third most popular global bird with a rodent in its beak. We found the biggest show of wintering waterfowl in the south end of the bay. This adorable green-winged teal is the smallest of North American snapping ducks. Its bill is lined with little comb-like spikes that help the teal filter invertebrates from the water as it feeds. Large flocks of American white pelicans winter at Don Edwards, where they forage almost exclusively by day. But during their breeding season, they also forage at night, because even though it's harder to see them, they can catch larger fish in the dark. And this matters because an adult pelican needs to catch 150 pounds of fish to raise one chick from birth until it can forage on its own. And by the way, right now there's a bunch of pelicans, flocks and flocks of pelicans showing up hungry around here. So it's a tough time for pelicans. We hear the grunting calls of Virginia rails often at Don Edwards, but seldom see one. Some argue that the expression thin as a rail was inspired by this secretive bird family. I'm not sure that's true. But this bird has adapted to life among the reeds in several ways. Its backbone is highly flexible, enabling it to slip easily through the dense stands of reeds. And note the dark feathers on its forehead. They are adapted to withstand the wear and tear that comes from pushing their head through the reeds. The Wilson snipe is another bird that is not so much rare and so perfectly with the shoreline vegetation that is see unless you practically step on it. That may explain why 19th century sharpshooters who successfully hunted this bird were nicknamed snipers. We were lucky to find this one out in the open. This red-necked phalarope was a here again, gone again bird that led us on a merry chase last fall. We'd read reports of sightings late in the day, only to hustle out the next morning and find them gone. We finally found a small flock feeding in Don Edwards' New Chicago marsh, and this phalarope must have found something good to eat because it still has its tongue hanging out. Pescadero Marsh is the largest wetland on the coast side of the San Francisco Peninsula. We saw this long-billed curlew striding through a tidal estuary, stopping now and then to poke about with his 8-inch beak. Now imagine trying to eat, bathe, fly, and mate with such a long appendage affixed to your face. But for curlews, their long bills allow them to reach the burrows of shrimp and crabs deep in the mudflats. To make searching easier, the tip of their bill is controlled by separate muscles, so it can act like a finger probing for food. Pescadero's marshes also attract squadrons of ducks and, one winter, 4 juvenile tundra swans. These young birds were born in northern Alaska and flew more than 4,000 miles from their breeding grounds to winter in California. During such migrations, the swans fly in V formations as high as 26,000 feet, often reaching airspeeds of up to 100 miles per hour. Excuse me. Laguna Seca, which translates as dry lake, is a vernal pool located in the North Coyote Valley Conservation Area. Vernal pools are seasonal wetlands that form in shallow depressions that fill with rainwater during the winter. As the days warm, the water gradually evaporates, turning the depressions into meadows. When we first visited Laguna Seca, it was winter, and the pond was teeming with waterfowl, including this American avocet. But when we returned the next fall, the pond had turned into a grassy meadow that was being grazed by a large flock of Canada geese and the smaller contingent of greater white-fronted geese. So wet or dry, Laguna Seca attracts and sustains waterfowl. Now, if you've wandered in our hills, you've seen each of these sunny habitats. We'll start with grasslands, which are often grazed by cattle. You would think grassland birds would be easy to see as they forage for seeds and insects in open ground. This is not the case, as we observed on our first visit to the Coyote Ridge Open Space Preserve. As we hiked through the grassy hillsides, we could hear western meadowlarks singing and calling, but they remained completely hidden from us in the tall grass. Finally, we spotted this male on a post singing endlessly to attract a mate. That experience taught us that the best and maybe the only time to see many grassland birds is when the males come out of hiding in spring to look for love or to sing for love. That was certainly true for this grasshopper sparrow. As its name suggests, this sparrow sings a high-pitched, buzzy, insect-like song. And when not out singing during the spring mating season, these sparrows stay completely hidden in the grass, running around on the ground like mice. It took us 2 years to get this photo of a chipping sparrow, even when we could hear them singing each spring. These rufous-capped songbirds get their name from the sharp chip sound they make when they call throughout the day, as they forage unseen in the grassy openings. Now, during the winter, chipping sparrows are non-stop eating machines. Each one consumes over 2 pounds of seed to survive the cold and dark. With an average body weight of less than half an ounce, this means that chipping sparrows consume over 70 times their own weight in seeds each winter. The sage phoebe is another visitor to grasslands in the winter. We often see them on fences and bushes, surveying the land below for insects. When they see flying food, they dart from their perch and snatch it in mid-flight. These birds have been fly-catching in western United States for a very long time. Paleontologists have found sage phoebe fossils in Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas, dating back to about 400,000 years ago. We caught this acrobatic pair of cliff swallows flying face-to-face this spring. Now, once these birds were limited to canyons with natural cliff faces where they could build their nests. Today, however, they've moved into other areas where barns, bridges, and buildings work as well as cliffs for nesting sites. You've probably seen their mud nests stuck on the undersides of eaves or bridges. To build them, the swallows gather mud in their bills along streams or puddles. They then carry their mud pellets back to their nesting site and stick them into place with a shaking motion. A finished nest contains 900 to 1,200 individual mud pellets, and in this picture you can see why it took so many. Clara Ranch State Beak, located just south of Half Moon Bay, was unknown to us until we started our post project. Now it's one of our favorite stops. White-tailed kites are commonly seen there, hunting for voles, mice, and rats in open fields. We're not just sure which of these this kite had in its claws when it landed on a nearby fence post, but it seemed happy with whatever it was. Now, I used to think that kites got their names because they look like paper kites in the sky. Just the opposite is true. The bird was named Kite in imitation of its call. The same name was only later given to toy kites because the kites soar like birds. With this mix of trees and grassy meadows, oak savanna is a perfect habitat for great horned owls. But we almost never see them. They silently hunt the meadows by night and roost hidden in trees by day. But for the last several years, a pair of great horned owls at Rancho San Antonio OSP have nested in a eucalyptus tree right beside a well-traveled trail. This year, their many fans were delighted to see 3 baby owlets in their nest, all of which recently fledged. Red-breasted sapsuckers are usually seen clinging to the side of tree trunks, tapping, probing, and prying at the bark. Unlike most woodpeckers, their diet is mostly made up of tree sap. To facilitate the flow of sap, they drill rows of shallow holes or sap wells in the bark, from which they lap up the sap using their specialized brush-tipped tongues. Fittingly, a group of these colorful birds is collectively known as a slurp of sapsuckers. This bird is the rarest in our gallery. It caught our attention when hiking in the Montebello Open Space Preserve. It is so unusual, we thought you'd like to see 2 views of it. We knew at first glance it was something unusual, but looking at our photographs, we were stumped. Identifying this bird was way above our pay grade. And so we appealed to our friend Brian Sullivan of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. He's the lab's foremost expert on North American raptors. Now, after much pondering and Peter sending him close-ups of various features, Brian decided that our mystery bird is a cross between a red-tailed hawk and a rough-legged hawk. Moreover, our bird is the only second documented occurrence of this rare hybrid. Chaparral habitats may look dry and uninviting to us, but they are home to a surprising variety of birds. California scrub jays are probably the smartest. The brain to body mass ratio of an adult scrub jay is said to rival that of chimpanzees and dolphins. California quail are hands down the most handsome chaparral dwellers. As you've probably observed, when quail are disturbed, they are more likely to run than fly from danger. With their short, powerful legs, they can achieve ground speeds of up to 12 miles per hour. Now, in contrast, the average human's running speed is more like 8 miles per hour. The male lazuli bunting is to our eyes the most colorful chaparral bird. Now, we've included 2 photos of stinging males to show how much lighting can affect the coloring of a bird, at least to us as observers. The bird on the left was photographed out in the open in bright morning sunlight. The bird on the right was photographed in the afternoon with sunlight filtering through leafy trees. Just as we humans recognize people by their voices, lazuli buntings do the same thing. Young males copy the tunes of older nearby males, thereby creating a kind of song neighborhood in which all lazuli sound similar. Males from the same song neighborhood recognize and tolerate each other, but they respond aggressively to buntings from outside their neighborhood whose songs just don't sound right. The American goldfinch is probably the latest chaparral bird to build a nest each year. To see why, check out this bird's crisp black, yellow, and white plumage. The American goldfinch is the only member of its family that molts, or replaces its feathers twice a year, in both fall and again in spring. Growing a fresh set of feathers each spring takes a lot of food and energy. And so this finch waits until midsummer when fossils or seeds like thistle seeds, foods like thistle seeds and nesting material like thistle down are available to finally build its nest and feed its young. The rock wren is the most talented chaparral singer. The male has a repertoire of 100 songs or more. Rock wrens live on high, dry, rocky slopes. They can survive there happily because they do not need access to water. Instead, they get whatever moisture they need from their food. The Anna's hummingbird is the smallest chaparral bird. Now, the Anna's habitat once stretched from Baja Peninsula to Southern California. Today, however, its range has expanded north to British Columbia and east to Texas. And that's because of us. Anna's now colonized new locations, even cold ones, following the spread of all-year flower gardens and backyard nectar feeders. I recently read that blackcaps, a common songbird in Europe, they're changing their weather migration pattern by flying north to British Isles rather than south to Africa for the winter. The reason is much the same as the Anna's expansion. Around half of all British households feed birds all year round. The blackcaps have discovered that hanging around backyard bird feeders in the UK each winter is a whole lot easier than migrating to their African wintering grounds. Smart birds. Forests are beautiful to walk in, but with their dense foliage, they are challenging places to see and photograph birds. Many forest birds are easier to hear than to see, and this is true of Steller's jays. These jays generally stick to the upper branches of tall trees, waiting to scold human interlopers with their harsh cries. They are also proficient mimics, often fooling us with calls that sound like red-tailed or red-shouldered hawks. Are they doing this to warn us about nearby predators, to scare us away by sounding like predators? We wish we knew. Far below the jays, tiny ruby-crowned kinglets scurry about the trees, gleaning the twigs and leaves for insects. Weighing just half an ounce, the kinglets are the energizer bunnies of the bird world. They just never seem to stop moving, especially when you're trying to photograph them. And yet, despite their frenetic pace, they run on just 10 calories a day. We see ruby-crowned kinglets every winter, But this is the first year we've also seen golden crown kinglets. Unlike the solitary ruby crowns, the golden crowns usually travel in small flocks. Given their royal-sounding name, it's not surprising that flocks of golden crowns have inspired a number of collective nouns, including castle, a castle of kinglets, a court, a kingdom, and my favorite, a dynasty of kinglets. The pileated is North America's largest woodpecker. Its curious name comes from the Latin pileatus, meaning capped or crested. If you're lucky, you might see a pileated woodpecker hammering away at a dying tree. It is most likely searching for its favorite food, carpenter ants. When found, the woodpecker uses its barbed tongue to gather up any ants and other bugs it finds hiding under the bark. We've included 2 photos of the same brown creeper just to show how hard they are to see unless you catch a glimpse of one in profile. The one on the left just simply looks like bark. These birds are very methodical as they search tree bark for insects with their long down curved bill. They start near the bottom of the tree, spiral their way up the trunk, probing the bark as they go. And when they reach the top, they fly to the bottom of the next tree to begin again. And once we learned this, it was easier to photograph them. This winter, we came across flocks of American robins feeding on toyon berries at Thornwood Open Space Preserve. Now, robins are the largest and most familiar birds in the thrush family. Like many birds, they are omnivores, using their keen eyesight to forage for berries, fruits, spiders, caterpillars, snails, and, of course, earthworms. In contrast to the gregarious robin, the hermit thrush, as its name suggests, leads a lonely life. Its haunting song inspired Walt Whitman to include this bird in his elegy to Abraham Lincoln, written shortly after the president's assassination. This poem, titled "When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed," includes this stanza. In the swamp, in secluded recesses, a shy hidden bird is warbling a song. Solitary the thrush, the hermit, withdrawn to itself, avoiding the settlements, sings by himself a song, song of the bleeding throat. We found these American dippers, North America's only truly aquatic songbirds, in nearby Stevens Creek. They fly, dive, and walk underwater in their search for insects and larvae. Their name comes from the habit of bobbing or dipping their bodies up and down. The more excited the dipper, the faster it dips. It's been clocked at about 160 dips a second. In this photo, we caught a young dipper picking up leaves and waving them around. Young dippers learn to feed by pecking at objects. On day 1 out of the nest, they pick at anything that contrasts with the background, such as these leaves on a rock. On day 2, they start to focus on potential food in the water. So based on this bird's behavior, we could tell it was just hours out of the nest. Wherever there are creeks and streams, you can lay odds that there are warblers nearby. The common yellowthroat is a year-round resident, most often seen in patches of reeds. Because these warblers nest so close to the ground, their chicks are highly vulnerable to predation. So to foil potential predators, adult yellowthroats sneak food to their chicks by dropping into dense vegetation away from their nest, sneaking through the undergrowth to feed their chicks, and then leaving by yet another route. Townsend's warblers pass through our area each fall and spring on their way to and from their wintering grounds in Mexico. Now, once in Mexico, they feed extensively on honeydew, a sugary fluid excreted by plant-sucking insects like aphids. If you are a rose grower, you know about this. Honeydew is such a favorite that some Townsends set up and fiercely defend territories around heavily infested trees. Yellow-rump warblers are also winter visitors, often seen hanging around water to feed on flying insects. Now, given this warbler has a yellow head, a yellow throat, and yellow flanks, we've always thought it curious that it was named for its rump. The downy woodpecker also forages near streams. The smallest North American woodpecker, the downy, weighs in at 3/4 of an ounce. Despite its small size, A downy is strong enough to strip bark from a tree, as we watch this one doing at La Honda Creek Open Space Reserve, until a hairy woodpecker showed up at the same tree, at which point the downy took off. Now the two birds look almost exactly alike, except that the hairy is twice the size of the downy. Despite their similarities, they are only distantly related, which raises the question of why have they evolved to look so much alike? Using data from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's project Feeder Watch, a scientist there noticed when a downy is at a feeder, it will give way to the larger hairy woodpecker. But the downy will stand its ground and drive off other birds twice its size, such as the beefy northern cardinal. This led him to propose what he calls the downy woodpecker innocent bystander trickery hypothesis. The idea is that by evolving to look like the hairy woodpecker, the little downy is able to trick larger birds into leaving it alone when feeding. On a recent visit to Burley Murray State Park, I used to call it Burley Murray State Park, Ranch State Park, I'll get it right. Burley Murray Ranch State Park. Peter was still getting his camera out of the car when I heard birdsong. I thought I knew it, so to check, I whipped out my phone, opened up a free app called Merlin, and selected its Sound ID program to listen to the song with me. Merlin quickly confirmed that I was hearing a purple finch. Another song ID popped up on my phone screen, and Alan's hummingbird was also calling, but too quietly for us to hear. I played the call back, looked up, and there it was. A beautiful male Alan's had heard the recording and flew in to investigate. The highway between San Francisco and Santa Cruz is dotted with many headlands and beaches that have been preserved for public use with help from Post. We often see northern harriers coursing low over the headlands, looking and listening for any movement below. Look at this photo carefully. It illustrates that the harrier, like other hawks, holds its eyes level when hunting, even as its body twists and turns in flight. The common raven is the largest American songbird, tipping the scales at more than 2.5 pounds. And despite its weight, the raven is an acrobatic flyer, often doing barrel rolls and somersaults in the air. And one raven was even seen flying upside down for more than half a mile. Now, we've heard that ravens steal eggs from other birds' nests, but this was the first time we saw such a theft in progress. By the way, we never identified the egg. When we saw this peregrine falcon perched on a high cliff above Año Nuevo Beach, we wondered why. Then we noticed these bank swallow holes in the cliffside with small birds flying in and out. Soon the falcon was dive-bobbing the swallows, creating panic among the swallows and the gulls watching from the beach below. Today, squadrons of brown pelicans are a common sight along the coast. They fly low over the waves, suddenly plunging into the sea when they see a fish. In the years after World War II, though, the widespread use of the pesticide DDT, brought them to the brink of extinction. Once DDT entered the food chain, it altered the ability of pelicans, as well as other large birds like raptors, to metabolize calcium. As a result, their eggshells became too fragile to survive being incubated. The banning of DDT in 1972 came just in time to save these prehistoric-looking birds. Like the brown pelican, the elegant tern forages over the ocean, dropping like a guided missile when it spots a fish. The fate of both these birds depends on the anchovy supply. When anchovies are abundant, they have high breeding success. And when the anchovy population crashes, as it did from 2009 to 2015, their populations crash as well. After much looking, we finally found surf birds this spring on the rocky islands lining Bean Hollow State Beach. This bird's winter range is among the longest and narrowest of any North American bird. In winter, surf birds can be found along the Pacific coast from the Arctic Circle to Tierra del Fuego, a range of nearly 11,000 miles in length. Its width, however, their winter range extends inland only a few yards above the tide line. Our last shorebird with his neon red bill and bright yellow eye is a hard-to-miss black oyster catcher. When researching oyster catchers, I learned that they eat pretty much anything, including mussels, limpets, whelks, urchins, crabs, marine worms, and beetle larvae, but there was nary a mention of oysters. Go figure. At last count, Post has protected close to 30 farms and ranches. Some are owned by Post and operated by tenants. Others are privately owned but protected by a conservation easement that limits the use of the land to agriculture or open space, no matter who holds the title to it in the future. We have birded on just a few of these properties, but only with permission from the owners or operators. Blue House Farm in San Gregorio welcomes visitors to its farmers market and new-picked strawberry patches. When we visited, huge flocks of blackbirds were gleaning the fields. Peter caught this male brewer's in perfect light as a pose for us on a fence post. We photographed our first magpies this spring on a post outing to Tilton Ranch. The purchase of this large ranch in 2020 preserved a critical pathway for animals in the Santa Cruz Range to migrate east to the Diablo Range and south to the Gabilan Range. The details of this purchase illustrate how Post works in concert with other partners to preserve key habitats. The $18 million tag was funded by no less than 8 different entities. Our last bird, the California towhee, is commonly seen in our gardens. When foraging on the ground, the towhee looks just like another plain brown bird. But in this pose, showing off its handsome collar and crest, and flashing its orange eye ring, it looks anything but plain. It's a good reminder that there is beauty to be found in every bird, no matter how dull or drab it might appear at first sight. One just has to take the time to look at it. And with that, I will turn you back to Peter, who has photographed all of the birds we've shared with you today.
So I almost always get questions about the photography side, so I'll say a few words about that. These days I'm using a Canon R5 full-frame mirrorless camera. The coolest thing about this camera is what Canon calls AI, animal eye, autofocus. And when it comes to photographing birds in flight, it's almost magical. All I have to do is keep the bird in the field of view, and the camera does the rest. It pinpoints the bird and tracks the bird as it flies, maintaining focus as it does. And the net result is that I get a lot more good flight shots than I did with the previous generation of technology. I most often pair the camera with this 400mm f4 lens. Some bird photographers prefer using an even bigger lens to get more reach, but this is the biggest piece of glass I'm happy to carry around in the field all day and shoot handheld, no tripod required. Field work is only half the fun. For every hour in the field, I spend about an hour or so curating and post-processing the photos using an Adobe product called Lightroom. Curating means discarding 80 to 90% of the photos and making sure that the keepers are correctly identified. And here's a typical example of post-processing. We have a strongly backlit subject, very common in flight photos. The original digital image, called a raw image, contains much more information than the JPEG image that's displayed on the left. But the information is there, and in Lightroom we can use it to lighten the bird and bring out the plumage, without at the same time blowing out the sky. In other words, turning the sky from blue to white. So to wrap up, we hope you've enjoyed our tour of birds of post-protected lands. All the photos that Diane showed you can be found at birds.smugmug.com, the website that I described at the outset. If you choose to visit, you'll find the birds arranged as they are in field guides in what's called taxonomic order by family, and then by species within the family. So for example, finches are family, and the house finch that we see in so many places is a species in that family. You can click through from family to species to thumbnails to full-size images. And once on a full-size image, you can use the arrows to page through all the photos of that species. Now, the photos are labeled with both species and location. So you can type, say, robin into the search box and find all the photos of the American robin. Or you can type, say, Windy Hill and find all the photos taken there. And one last word, the legal fine print says that anyone is free to use the photos for any non-commercial purpose, provided only the credit is given to me as the photographer. And so with that, we'll thank you again for joining us. And Mark, I don't know, perhaps there's time for a question or comment or two.
Yes, thank you, Diane and Peter. That was wonderful. And I wish I had like a clicker counter for each bird species that you mentioned. It has to be something like, 40 or 50 or something. Man. And there was a good number in there, and I would call myself a naturalist at this point, that thinks about this stuff quite a bit. There was quite a few that I hadn't even ever heard of. It's so cool. It's been such a journey for both of you. Thanks for your work. I'm excited to get into that website and explore more. And also, if any of you are on Instagram, you'll notice that Post has been sharing a lot of these photos for many months. So that's another place that I've been learning a little bit along the way. And I see a lot of people thanking both of you in chat. One person was saying it's inspiring them to visit more Post-protected open spaces and birdwatch more, which is what we really want to hear. So a lot of happy people out there. So yeah, we have time for a few questions, and I'll start off with a couple of easy ones that you probably get a lot. But the first one is somebody who's getting into birding, any tips for a new birder? Like how would you approach that mission of learning and getting in?
The first thing I'd say is to take a class in birding. So we started by going to night school classes at Palo Alto High School.
Okay.
And we were so bad at first that we did the beginning course at least 4 times, because they started with an intermediate course and we were there with all these good birders, and it was really intimidating. The only thing I would do was tally things. I didn't know much a crow from a caterpillar practically. The other thing is that I would join Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society or your nearest Audubon Society, because there you will find people who give courses, give classes, and take you on field trips. Sequoia Audubon is another one. Golden Gate Audubon in San Francisco as well. Going out in the field with somebody who really knows their birds and is happy to have beginners is incredibly useful. And the third thing is just buy a good pair of binoculars and look in your own backyard. Learn the birds in your yard. That's how we started. We put a bird feeder out in the near our driveway where you could look out from the kitchen window. And that's where we really have our best birding.
Those are great tips. And that's wonderful for you all to admit that you took that class so many times. And it's
excellent beginning birding 3 times.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of comforting actually. Because the thing that I've realized is I learned native plants too, and birds is just, you go out on a trip, you learn, you look at maybe 10 or 15, 20 different species, but what do you retain? Like 3 of those. You have to see them multiple times for it to kind of lock into your brain. So that's another thing, is just to be patient with yourself, right?
True. Yeah. Repetition helps.
Right.
Some like learning a new language. We all know from learning a foreign language, you have a lot of repetition until you get something. Well, birding is a kind of language. It's new words, new vocabulary.
Yep. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, another one that I thought that it's important to touch on is just birding ethics. There's more and more kind of like chatter about, you know, how folks should conduct themselves, things that you might not think about as a beginning birder. But do you guys have any tips for folks about how people can be kind of courteous birders?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are a few aspects to this. One is that particularly for nesting birds, give them lots of space. Never play calls or vocalizations. Everybody has 10,000 calls on their cell phone. Give them lots of space. If you see a rarity, people often don't disclose their location for true rarities because of the threat. And the other thing, getting back to the to playing, we used to say playing a tape. Now it's all on your phone. We do occasionally play vocalizations, but extremely sparingly, rarely and sparingly and cautiously. People have different opinions on that, but our opinion is very little.
Right. Yeah, and especially if you're starting out, you know, best probably not to, you know, play vocalizations, but you know, as you become more aware of the different dynamics with different species, you know, perhaps there's a little bit of room there, but for the general public, yeah, you know, one of our past presenters just came on. You know, if you're playing vocalizations, it could be quite confusing for birds. Yeah, well, I'm glad that we touched on that. And just to quickly answer one question, the app that enables you to identify bird calls is called Merlin. And that is just so awesome. And back to your recommendation to do backyard birding, I've definitely been doing that myself, and just having that app handy when I'm in my yard, and learning my neighborhood of birds that way. But it's great out on the trail too. Is there any other birding apps that I'm missing? The Merlin is the main one, right?
Well, Merlin is terrific because it will help you identify birds by answering a few questions of them.
Yeah.
Like a sound ID you mentioned, and also by photographs.
Yeah.
And in addition, it is a field guide in your pocket, so it has essentially all the birds you'll ever get to see in this area, or almost any place actually. And so you don't really need to carry a field guide either, and it's free. There are some other field guides apps. They're generally about $30, and Merlin is free from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So that's a terrific resource in your pocket. You can look at eBird, which is a website, and find out everything about what birds have been seen recently in your area. Or you can use to plan a trip and say what time of year is the best time to see various birds in some location you might be considering. So that's another terrific resource, ebird.org.
That's great. Thank you. One person is asking, do you two lead birding trips? Could they join you? But you know, that maybe you do. You could answer that, but also a comment like you said, I think Diane is joining a group, or you know, getting involved with the local Audubon chapters is a great option for getting in a birding group, going out on a organized trip. Any other further direction on how to go on a birding trip locally?
Well, we don't do birding trips. I've done some docent work at Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, but not specifically focused on birding. And they're much better birders than we are doing that. But I think the local birding groups, there's so many ways you can get out. Also, you can find them on Meetup. People have birding trips on Meetup. There's Saved by Nature does birding trips. There's all kinds of groups now doing birding trips, including for kids. So I would say go through a local club or Audubon society.
That's great. And you could also, another little tip is look on, if you're on Facebook, you could poke around and look for some groups on Facebook that exist around birding, and you could just learn a lot that way.
And
well.
if I can interject, Mark, one thing that just has so warmed us is that the birding community are just wonderful people. Nobody tries to impress you with what a big shot they are. We've birded with some of the most famous birders on the face of the planet. And all they want to do is help you find the bird and identify it and
enjoy it.
Not try to.
Yeah.
They're thrilled.
Yeah, just help you learn. So just hook up with these Audubon chapter and or
birding clubs,
professional guys like Alvaro Jaramillo.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Wonderful guide, or in Los Gatos.
Lisa Myers.
Let's
go birding.
Let's go birding.
She has a birding store there.
Los Gatos,
there you go.
Yeah,
so there's lots of options.
Lots of options, and everybody just wants you to go out and have fun and learn and see, and that's just wonderful.
That's great. Yeah, and I think some folks could be unduly intimidated, but it's just like I said earlier, these things, it's a lifelong thing. The journey will never end of learning, and it's okay wherever you are in that path. Great. Well, I think that we're doing pretty good here. While we're wrapping up, I'm going to pull up your website one more time for people to remember that this is a resource to learn. And if you need photos, this is a great resource for all sorts of conservation groups too. Post is using these photos very frequently, and we thank you so much. Of course, please credit Peter Hart if they were to be used. And yeah.
Mark, on the photos, as I said, they're freely available for any non-commercial purpose. Now, when you go to the website and click on a full-size photo, you'll see a little down arrow, the download arrow, and the top left margin, the top left corner of the photo. And that's a download. You can download full res images of anything you like and use them, as you said, for any non-commercial purpose.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I guess we'll take one last question here. I missed it earlier, but it was asked again just now. So right now we're coming into June. It's May 26th. What would you recommend in terms of the next month or so? Like where would you go where there's the most interesting birding action?
Well, birders always say that summer is a quiet time. Right now we're in mating season. There's a lot of sound out there. There's a lot of activity from birds. And then as we go into summer, all of the water birds have mostly gone north because they breed in the high Arctic. The warblers have all gone north. They breed up in the Arctic. The ones that stick around are the birds that are you most familiar with. And so this is a time to really focus on the yard birds, the birds that are familiar, the birds that are in our parks nearby. They may not be the most exotic, but they're here for the summer, and we often overlook them for the rare and wondrous thing. So I would say any park, any place you go, you will hear and see birds, just not as many as in the fall when we have migration again, and the winter when we're home to a gazillion birds that come to winter here.
That's a good tip, and more generally about especially the oak woodland and chaparral habitats. In the spring especially, there's so much going on, but it does kind of feel a little bit more dormant coming in here. But there's just so much to appreciate across the board in our local habitats, even in the summer period, where things might be a little bit more quiet, on a number of levels. So
one thing to remember is birds need water. Most birds need water. So
yeah.
if there's a water feature fairly close, you're likely to see more birds, especially in the late afternoon.
Oh, perfect. Great. Well, Diane and Peter, thank you so much for sharing your passion with our community here and for everything you've done. And I've learned a lot. I have more homework to do, but we just all appreciate you and thank you for the time today. Hopefully you get out to do some birding sooner than later.
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for inviting us.
Okay. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
See ya.